Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
All the pistols we have here were out on display. They've all been purchased in the last 24 hours.
An increase in gun sales, why local stores are selling out. Also, another seemingly random attack in the Lower Mainland. A woman stabbed inside a superstore in Surrey.
It would be the same as if you and I got in an SUV and drove up to Kamloops.
And the carbon footprint being left by our local hospitals and how two doctors are trying to curb it.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Anita Bathe. Handgun sales have surged in BC since the federal government announced its plan on gun control. If passed, it will ban the sale, transfer, importation of handguns in Canada. As Brady Strachan reports, that has some local stores selling out.
First thing every responsible gun owner does is check.
Dan Shelmy shows off some of the handguns sold this week at this firearms shop in Kelowna. His store sold all the pistols in stock on Tuesday by noon, about 15 in total, as customers rushed in to buy handguns while they still can.
It's like when the lockdowns happened and everyone got worried and they went out and bought 600 rolls of toilet paper. People hear that something is happening and they panic.
Similar surges in sales have been reported in the Lower Mainland and on Vancouver Island. Legislation tabled in Ottawa this week to reduce gun violence will put a freeze on all handgun sales, transfers, and imports if passed. Shelmy says reaction in his store has been one of confusion and frustration, where responsible gun owners feel like they are being targeted.
The Prime Minister said it in his speech, legal gun owners are not the problem. And then within 10 seconds, basically said, you're not the problem, but we're going to treat you like you are the problem.
Criminal gun violence in Canada has risen by a significant margin, according to Statistics Canada, with the criminal use of firearms up by more than 80% from 2009 to 2019. But critics of the newly announced legislation say the freeze on handgun sales is the wrong approach to stopping that.
Whether you say, okay, well, you can't have a handgun or not, it's not going to reduce violent firearms crime in Canada. It doesn't have a chance. And it doesn't address mental health issues, which is a conversation that just hasn't even begun yet in Canada.
And despite the surge in sales this week, people who sell firearms say the legislation will impact their bottom line.
Businesses like ours, we're going to see a hit because, of course, we can't sell handguns.
He wants to see the government move its target off responsible gun owners and focus in on criminals importing firearms from the U.S. Brady Strachan, CBC News, Kelowna.
Cleared.
Turning now to a scary scene for shoppers inside a Surrey grocery store today. A seemingly random stabbing in the Guildford area. The suspect is on the run and police are now hoping you can help find them. Dan Burrett joins us with more. Dan, where exactly was this?
Inside a superstore as people picked up groceries, Anita. Mounties say just before 1 p.m. they got a call that someone had stabbed a woman inside the large store on 104th Avenue and 146th Street. Store staff gave the victim first aid and she was taken to hospital in serious condition. Police say a suspect ran off right after. They're looking for this person, described as a woman in her 30s with long dark hair, wearing a navy blue V-neck shirt, black pants, white shoes, and carrying a light blue purse.
We do recognize that there is a public safety concern given the fact that it is not believed these parties were known to each other or that there was a conflict that started this incident.
So again, that's why they're asking anyone who has seen this woman or knows where she is to contact them. They say, again, she's believed to be in her 30s, long dark hair, as you can see, wearing a blue V-neck shirt, black pants, white shoes, and holding a light blue purse. Anita.
Dan Burrett for us tonight. Thank you. Charges have been laid in yesterday's random and unprovoked knife attack at an East Vancouver gas station. 61-year-old Leslie Dale Chudik is accused of aggravated assault, uttering threats, and driving in a manner that's dangerous to the public. You can see in the footage the suspect holding a knife and what police call a machete yesterday morning at this Esso on East Hastings near the Burnaby border. This was after he allegedly crashed a van and hit a pedestrian who is accused of then stabbing another person. Another person was punched before police apprehended Chudik. He will stay in police custody until his first court appearance. Well, it's a fact few people consider ahead of surgery, but Canada's healthcare system is thought to generate about 5% of the country's greenhouse gas emissions, and hospital operating rooms leave a disproportionate footprint. Val Puri has this story on the anesthesiologists at 2 Metro Vancouver hospitals who are changing that.
It's unlikely that while in surgery, patients contemplate climate change, but efforts to curb hospital greenhouse gas emissions do start in the operating room.
We really only have 2 choices for gases for keeping you asleep. They're actually both bad greenhouse gases.
One, however, is 25 times harder on the environment than the other. Consider the carbon footprint of desflurane during 1 2-hour surgery.
It would be the same as if you and I got in an SUV and drove up to Kamloops. Whereas the other option really is like a short trip just locally.
The other option, sevoflurane, is now the only option here at Royal Columbian Hospital and Port Moody's Eagle Ridge Hospital. All desflurane vaporizers have been removed from the operating rooms and shipped back to their manufacturer.
It doesn't take much anesthetic to put someone under. Only 5% of the gas actually is absorbed by the patient. The other 95% goes right into the atmosphere.
Sevoflurane lingers there for a year. Desflurane lingers for 14.
It is a small step. It's an important step in the context of healthcare, and it represents this growing movement of healthcare providers and other professionals looking out for climate impacts.
The University Health Network in Toronto has implemented technology to capture anesthetic gas the patient doesn't absorb and then sends it to be recycled. A Sudbury hospital stopped using desflurane almost 3 years ago. The doctor behind that move says it's time for government to step up.
That if you apply the current carbon pricing mechanism in Canada to these agents, desflurane would no longer be competitive, and hospitals probably just wouldn't buy it, and that would be the forcing function of just removing desflurane.
There's no difference to the patient between the gases. The popularity of desflurane, doctors say, has been mostly due to marketing. But as they become more and more aware of its environmental impact, the easiest solution is to just not use it.
We're the largest anesthesia group in the country to take this sort of step.
Val Puri, CBC News, New Westminster.
The cause of a deadly fire in North Vancouver remains under investigation tonight, but a senior who lives in the building says he and his family have been complaining about appalling conditions inside the nonprofit complex for years, long before the fire ripped through this week. As Yasmin Gandam reports, 90-year-old Peter Phelan has called the Silverlin Apartments home for almost 15 years and has been pushing to get problems fixed.
The grass will never get cut.
For Peter Phelan, his home is everything to him.
This place could be a paradise.
But for the last few years, the condition of the building has deteriorated, and he says it's starting to rot.
I do not have friends come here. I'm too embarrassed to have them drive up and see this building.
Phelan says there are rats in the building and signs of rot on the walls and balconies. Shopping carts and garbage bins are also scattered across the entrance of the complex.
It's a shame because the location of the building itself and the community is wonderful. I do understand some of their plight here. They haven't any money.
The building is subsidized by BC Housing and has been the responsibility of the nonprofit Lowland Senior Housing Society. In a statement to CBC, BC Housing says they are helping the Lowland Society to fund major repairs. Phelan has been hearing of those repairs for the past 3 years, but says so far it's been all talk and no action.
Look at the building.
North Vancouver Seymour NDP MLA Susie Chan says she knows the building well and has also been doing what she can to get issues resolved.
So what's happened is an extensive plan, like a much broader scope of plan has been put together for the building, and they are in process of getting it implemented.
Phelan says many of the other residents in the building do not feel they can speak up.
These people are extremely vulnerable.
Yes.
They'll accept anything because it's a place to live in. And the rent is very low, and that's why I'm here.
For now, Phelan continues to patiently wait for the building to feel like home once again. Yasmin Gantam, CBC News, North Vancouver.
An investigation is underway after an ammonia leak this afternoon at the Killarney Community Centre in East Vancouver. Staff became aware of the problem shortly after 2 p.m. The centre and nearby Killarney Secondary School were immediately evacuated because ammonia can be deadly. 13 people were treated for minor symptoms like a scratchy throat and stinging eyes. A hazmat team contained the leak and the centre has reopened. Last week, an ammonia leak at an industrial plant in Kamloops killed one man. And a small sinkhole has authorities telling drivers to avoid Waterfront Road near Canada Place tonight. Only essential service and local traffic are allowed through. The sinkhole is on a raised part of the road over the water just east of the C-Bus terminal. The number of home sales is falling in Greater Vancouver, returning to what the Real Estate Board considers typical for the season. They say just over 2,900 homes were sold last month across the region. This is down 32% compared with the same time last year. On Tuesday, the BC Real Estate Association says it expects house sales to drop by 22% this year from 2021's record high. These numbers come with modest signs that the fast-rising housing prices could also be leveling off. And whether you rent or are looking to buy, affordable housing is on short supply across the region. To help ease the pressure for working artists, the City of Vancouver is opening new spaces where they can live and create. Just off Main Street in Mount Pleasant, this building will provide 30 homes. Rental rates are tied to artists' annual earnings and capped at 30% of their monthly income. Tenants were picked in a lottery system that prioritized people usually disadvantaged from accessing resources in the cultural sector, such as Black, Indigenous, and racialized people, as well as those living with disabilities and members of the LGBTQ2 community. An Indigenous professor at the University of Northern BC has been appointed interim director of the Institute of Indigenous Peoples' Health. She takes on the federal role after it was left empty by an academic who falsely claimed Indigenous ancestry.
Self-determination, engagement, collaboration with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples, organizations, and communities is my first priority in taking on this work.
The Canadian Institutes of Health Research have appointed Dr. Margot Greenwood, who is Cree. The previous director, Carrie Barusa, was cut in November after a CBC News investigation cast doubt on claims she was Indigenous. Well, 70 years on the throne for one remarkable royal. After the break, we'll take you to London for the first day of Queen Elizabeth's Platinum Jubilee. Thanks for watching our commercial-free live stream. A group of volunteers came together in Saskatchewan to create a stunning piece of art. It's a community quilt that is now on display at the museum in town. The project took more than 3 months to finish, and each volunteer worked on a small section of the quilt, which depicts how the town looked in the past and now in the present.
We had a new member on our museum board, a lady who moved a few years ago to Gravelburg, and she's an artist. And she suggested that we would make a community quilt. And I did not really have an idea what she meant with that, but when she came with her proposal, she took pictures of the museum and made a drawing out of it, and said, we're gonna make this with volunteers and recycled material. There were people, it was 99% women, from the age of 8 till 80 who worked on it. About 12 of us worked on and off on it. And so most of us have no idea, have never done anything like this, and we just each worked on a little part. It's really the history of Gravelburg. So the elevator is one of the oldest buildings in town. And then to the left is how Gravelburg used to be in the past. So that's more the grays, the darker colors. And this is how Gravelburg is now. More color, we got a new school, we got the semis, you know. And so that's how we put it all together. And it took us about 3 months to make the quilt. So if you look closely, you see there's flowers in there. And when we did the unveiling, one of the little girls was there, and she said, "Oh, I did the flowers," you know. And so she was so proud that she was part of it. So then they all signed on the back of the quilt. So, you know, in 100 years from now, they're proud that they or show their grandchildren that they worked on it.
A Port Alberni dog is lucky to be alive after a run-in with a cougar last night. Now conservation officers are on the lookout for the predator. At around 9 p.m., an owner let his dog Alaska outside when the cougar pounced. The man rescued his Boston Terrier by kicking the big cat away. The attack happened in a residential area along Timberline Road. Conservation officers are asking people to stay away from the area. And the BC legislature is wrapping up its current session ahead of a summer break. But while the NDP government might be ready for that pause, it's still under pressure to deal with a shortage of family doctors and housing affordability. As Mira Baines reports, the BC Liberals and their new leader are vowing to keep the heat on all summer long.
The last days of the legislative session finished with debate over budget estimates.
We have been working on building out our primary care networks.
Spending on the new Royal BC Museum, which has a price tag of $789 million, emerged late in the session after it was announced last month. Opposition leader Kevin Falcon, who was elected as an MLA and returned to the legislature, wasted no time focusing on the huge cost.
So mark my words, Friday, May the 13th is the day that the NDP really have signed their own death warrant as a political party. If they continue to go ahead with that, this will be their fast ferries, and this will bring their government down.
The issue seemed to steamroll over significant changes to lowering childcare costs, building more infrastructure, bringing in home buyer protections, and dealing with climate disasters, including flooding and wildfires.
Our government's doing everything we can to deal with the issues that matter to British Columbians. The opposition is going to do its job, which is to ask questions, and our job is to govern in the best interests of the people of this province.
The attacks on the government's performance were two-pronged, with a crisis in healthcare growing. Doctors and nurses, both heading into contract negotiations, held rallies demanding action. The shortage of family doctors and long lines for walk-in clinics had the Premier on the defensive and losing his cool.
Do you want a headline or do you want action?
As we head into summer, there are concerns over wildfires and flooding. Political parties are also focused on a possible by-election in the coming months for Surrey South. It's a test for the NDP government and the BC Liberals' new leader. Mira Baines, CBC News, Victoria.
Well, it's a grand celebration in the UK, marking Queen Elizabeth's Platinum Jubilee. Our Chris Brown is in London as the nation pays tribute to the monarch's 70 years on the British throne.
On a day when Britain looked its best, the most significant moment came on the balcony of Buckingham Palace, featuring 4 generations of royals. The Queen's big smile conveyed more than any words could. The day began with the over 260-year-old tradition of trooping the color. Prince Charles, Prince William, and the Queen's daughter, Princess Anne, led the procession to Horse Guards Parade. The Queen used to ride herself or come by carriage, but at 96 years old, on this day she watched with her cousin, the Duke of Kent.
This is Britain's first Platinum Jubilee and maybe the only one ever. For some here, it's a chance to say thank you to the Queen for a job well done. For others, it's almost a farewell.
These Canadians hope not.
There's plenty of life left in the old girl. Definitely. She's not on her way out. I don't care what anyone says.
I saw William and I saw Charles and I saw the little kids. It was awesome.
The Queen appeared most engaged by the Royal Air Force fly past, although it was her great-grandson, 4-year-old Prince Louis, who had one of the most photographed moments as he covered his ears from the noise of the aircraft. All in all, a strong display of the monarchy's future is what the Queen was striving for, says this royal expert.
We've got 3 heirs to succeed her, Charles, William, and George. So the monarchy actually in that respect is in pretty good shape. I think that's the Queen projecting that image of unity, a big family, a family united.
To end the day, another spectacle with thousands of beacons lit across the Commonwealth, including one atop Canada's High Commission on Trafalgar Square. The Queen in Windsor pressed a button to light the centerpiece, a giant sculpted tree outside of Buckingham Palace. Chris Brown, CBC News, London.
It's all things neon these days at the Richmond Night Market, what they are trying to capture with retro lighting. That's next.
The Royal aircraft arrived in Vancouver this morning bang on schedule at 11:30. Punctuality is a trademark of Royal tours. A small crowd was on hand at the airport to greet the Queen, Prince Philip, and Princess Anne. So also were Governor General Michener and Mrs. Michener, Prime Minister and Mrs. Trudeau, and Premier Bennett of British Columbia. The Queen was looking relaxed and fit and showed no evidence of the cold which has been bothering her for the past 10 days and which for a time caused official concern that she might not be able to carry on with her 9-day tour. The royal party was greeted first by the Governor General, Mr. Michener, then by Prime Minister and Mrs. Trudeau. The weather was perfect, clear skies with temperatures in the low 60s. After the formal greetings were over, the Queen, Prince Philip, and Princess Anne mingled for several minutes with the crowd at the airport, shaking hands and chatting. From the outset, organizers of the tour have worked to make it as informal as possible, and on day 1 at least, the formula seemed to be in order. From the airport, an hour-long motorcade downtown to Vancouver Harbor and the Royal Yacht Britannia. The size of the crowd along the entire 15-mile route amazed everyone. Estimates varied from 30 to 75,000 people. There wasn't much shouting or cheering, but tour officials said the crowd was perhaps the largest ever to greet the Queen on a Canadian tour. At some points, the royal motorcade was slowed by spectators spilling out into the street. At the harbor, the cavalcade went directly to Britannia, which has been in Vancouver for several days and which will be the official home for the royal party during their BC tour. The Queen and Prince Philip arrived in one car, a Rolls, while Anne came in a second, and the rest of the official party followed close behind. Accompanying the Queen aboard Britannia were the Governor General, the Trudeaus, and Premier Bennett and his wife. The ship cast off immediately the official party was aboard. Again, an enormous crowd was on hand to see them off. The royal yacht sailed under the Lions Gate Bridge and out into the Strait of Georgia for a 6-hour voyage to Victoria. Tonight, the Queen spent a relaxing evening aboard the yacht. Her only official engagement in Victoria was a brief visit to City Hall for a meeting with civic officials. Tomorrow, the first day of what promises to be a tightly scheduled and hectic tour. Mike McCourt, CBC News, Vancouver.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver.